Good morning and welcome back. Today I want to go over a book that I've been wanting to add to the channel for a while now. It's a book that has taught me a lot, and it's one of those books that helped my understanding of human nature and human interactions, human belief systems, many things. It applies in a broad array of situations, and that's a large part of the reason why I think about this book so often. So it's one of those books that you read it and it's really something that you continually think back to as you go forward into life. And in that way, I think it's such a useful book. And that is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. So if you want to stick around and watch the rest of this video, I'll go over what this book will teach you, and I'll give you enough information right here to carry forward with you. And then I imagine that a subset of you will be intrigued enough to want to read the book on your own if you haven't already. So who is Jonathan Haidt? Jonathan Haidt is an American psychologist, social psychologist. He got his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. He's currently the professor of the New York University Stern School of Business. He's a professor there. And his research largely focuses on morality, emotions, culture. It makes him really highly qualified for the subjects that he tackles in this book. And we'll talk more about him and some of his theoretical frameworks. He's also the author of other books such as The Happiness Hypothesis, The Coddling of the American Mind, and his newest book, The Anxious Generation, all of which I would recommend. I've learned so much from Jonathan Haidt. I've done research work on my own that deals with life history theory, moral foundations theory, and obsessive intrusions. And I've read a lot of Haidt's work, and I've referenced him, cited him many times. So let's get into this book specifically. This book has the subtitle of Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And with it being the holidays, I hope that everyone can enjoy their time with family and friends. But when you get around all these other people that you're not normally interacting with, you may notice during Thanksgiving, during the other holidays, that you have differing opinions on things. And so I think it's a pertinent time to go over this subject, and it may help you while you're with family and friends this season to understand the different viewpoints that people are coming from. So, starting off, there are a few key things that we need to learn over the course of this video. One would be the difference between type 1 and type 2 mental processing, okay? Now, type 1 is named as such because this is actually the type of mental processing that you do most of the time for most things. This is an automatic, really subconscious sort of mental processing. It's very quick, and it uses what we call heuristics, mental heuristics. Now, if you're not familiar with the term, that's okay. Really what it means is it's pattern recognition by the mind, which the mind is very good at, and it's a sort of mental shortcut that the mind takes so that you're not having to actually sit down and think through every decision that you make. Now, at first you may think that you typically do think through all of your decisions, but we got to take a moment, take a step back, and really recognize that that's not actually the case. Most of the time, all throughout the day, you're actually making tons and tons of decisions consecutively, back to back to back. Think about just driving from one place to the other. You make all kinds of decisions, when to take the foot off the brake and onto the gas and vice versa, and when to turn the wheel and when to slow down and anticipate traffic and all of these things. You're not stopping and thinking through and belaboring all of these decisions. You're largely doing a lot of it automatically. And it's even more pertinent, but perhaps a little bit harder to describe because of the nuances there, in terms of social settings and social interactions. You wouldn't believe the amount of decisions that your mind is making through type 1 processing on how to navigate those sorts of situations. So many decisions are being made, most of which without your conscious awareness. So that's type 1 processing that relies heavily on mental heuristics, or these mental shortcuts. Now, there's also type 2 processing, as you might have guessed, and this is the more conscious, strategic type of processing where you're slowing down and you are, through your own awareness, really going through the details of a decision and trying to make sense of it, okay? So this is type 1 and type 2 mental processing. Again, most of the time, almost all the time really, you're using type 1 processing. Now, some of the time, think about when you're working through a math problem or you're really trying to think through the details of a decision, you're slowing down, you're using type 2 processing. Your mind evolved to make use of type 1 processing as much as possible because it's faster, better for survival, takes up less resources, okay? Now, Jonathan Haidt has developed an analogy for this to explain it a little bit further, which I like, and he refers to this analogy as the rider and the elephant. You can think of the elephant, big, large animal that the small rider is sitting up on top of, as type 1 processing. The elephant sways this direction or that direction, and the rider on top, being the symbol for the type 2 processing, has the job of post hoc, or after the fact, deciding and rationalizing why the elephant went one way or the other. The rider isn't really controlling which way the elephant goes in this analogy, but the rider is very, very good at making up reasons after the fact, unaware to the person. They think it is the reason, but it's really after the fact that this reason is developed to justify the direction that the elephant is going, or the direction of the type 1 processing. So how does this all make sense? Okay, say you're having a discussion with someone and they take it into the realm of religion or politics. They say something that you don't necessarily agree with. Perhaps you don't agree with it at all. Immediately, you recognize that you don't believe that, or you don't agree with that, or you don't like that. Now, that is your type 1 processing, using mental heuristics of your core fundamental beliefs, your belief systems, deciding quickly, subconsciously, that that is not your territory, that's not what you believe. Now, after the fact, type 2 processing kicks in, starts rationalizing why you don't agree with whatever was said, why you think it's wrong, why you think your way is better. All of that comes after the fact, but before any of that processing took place, that type 1 processing, the elephant, already swayed in your particular direction. Now, to take this a step further, we need to understand the importance in terms of understanding how this works, that the type 1 processing is not consciously, it's not in the conscious awareness of the person. So this comes up a lot of the time when I see people trying to argue politics and religion and other things that rely on core beliefs. They try to argue their point by using all of these rational details, and it's not getting them anywhere. And they're frustrated and they're thinking, why can you not seem to just get what I'm saying? What I'm saying makes sense. It's like you're not hearing me. Well, they're arguing using the rider, but they're trying to argue against someone else's elephant. And it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter how, rational it is, what points they make. Most of the time, when they're trying to make these rational arguments against someone else's elephant, so to speak, against someone else's type 1 processing, it's not going to make a difference, because no matter what they say, that person's elephant is going to sway in their particular direction, and their rider or their type 2 processing is going to come up with whatever reasons necessary after the fact to justify why they don't agree with you or why they believe what they believe. So when you understand this, you come to understand these interactions in a more nuanced way, in a fashion that helps you navigate these sorts of situations, to understand when it's worth having these discussions with people, and to understand that unless the person themselves is open to having a new frame of reference or open to changing their mind in one way or another, then you're not going to make much headway by trying to argue with these rationalistic arguments against their core fundamental beliefs that are rooted in type 1 sort of processing patterns, okay? So that's type 1 and type 2 processing. That alone, I think, is really fundamental to understand and really useful as you move forward and as you navigate social situations. And it becomes even more useful when you recognize that it's not just other people, it's you yourself, it's me. When you recognize that we all operate in this way. One way to become somewhat more aware of the difference between your own type 1 and type 2 processing would be things like practicing mindful meditation. These sorts of practices that have an emphasis on mindfulness can help you to recognize when your own type 1 processing is kicking in and help you to question, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I feel this way all of a sudden? And help you to slow down a little bit, recognize your own internal processes, and then you can do your best to try to understand what's really going on. But we're not, none of us are infallible in this way. This is something that we all do, and we do it most of the time. And in fact, it's necessary, because if we didn't have that type 1 processing, which in some cases can lead to biases that we may prefer to dispense with, beyond that, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, these sorts of processes that rely on heuristics help us to simply navigate through the day and get through life in a way that's actually viable, okay? Now, let's move on to the other big topic of this book, and that is moral foundations theory, okay? Now, moral foundations theory is the idea that our moral concerns, our moral beliefs, are rooted in, let's say, 5 particular moral foundations. Now, these moral foundations have helped us to navigate social environments over the course of our psychological evolutionary history, okay? Which is really critical to us because we are very much a social species. There are plenty of examples in this book and many others of just how much of a social species we are. So let's go through each of the 5 foundations. I'll go through as quick as I can while trying to still explain them in an adequate way. There are 2 individuating foundations. So these are foundations that are more focused on the individual, and they are the foundation of care and harm. I was mixing those up. So the care-harm foundation. This is rooted in the need to keep people safe, particularly mothers keeping their offspring safe, as babies are born quite helpless to defend themselves. And without this evolutionary way of thinking evolving over time, then we wouldn't have that innate carnal desire to keep our offspring safe, to keep other people safe from harm. So there's the foundation of care-harm, I did it again, that is so focused on trying to reduce the amount of harm in our environment, trying to keep people safe. Now there's also the other individuating foundation, number 2, fairness and cheating, the foundation of fairness, cheating. And this foundation revolves around reciprocity. If any of you have read Cialdini's book, Influence, you know that this is one of his core tenets of how to, persuade people, but by using reciprocity. It's so innate to us, it's so inherent to us that if someone does something for you, that you feel this desire to do something for them. And this helps establish fair trade within a social setting, so that you have people who aren't just constantly taking from the system without giving anything back. Those people end up getting exiled typically. So care, harm, and fairness, okay? So then let's move on to the 3 binding foundations. These foundations are even more so related to making sure that we have good group cohesion. And what do I mean by that? As groups grow in size and get bigger and bigger, there's more of a necessity to try to keep that group cohesive so that it doesn't fragment and break apart, so that you don't have different parts of the group breaking off on their own and warring with each other. So each of those 3 foundations that we have remaining, one being loyalty/betrayal. Now this emerged to foster a strong group bond and cooperation, particularly in these contexts where survival depends on unity, which is many contexts really. And this has the added effect of something that typically we think of as a negative thing, particularly in today's world, where there's a sense of us versus them, where there's a sense of my group versus your group. This was very common, and in many ways still is today, but we don't need to dig too much into the nuance of it because I understand the moral arguments against it in today's context. But in a general sense, just think of the idea that I'm gonna make sure that, my wife and kids are taken care of first before expending my resources on other people, that sort of idea. So that's one. And then we have the foundation of authority/subversion. This becomes even more important as groups grow, as I said before, and having a hierarchical system that's respected throughout the society so that you can have a sort of order, a sort of organization to how things are set up so that things can move one way or another in a fashion that doesn't take too much time and where there's not too much confusion on which way to go, who to follow, who to let lead, those sorts of ideas. Think about the military, very much structured in a hierarchical fashion, and it's very respected throughout the ranks so that decisions can be made effectively and with unity. And finally, this fifth foundation, it's referred to as sanctity/degradation, and this is really the purity principle, if you will. This arose out of an evolutionary need to avoid pathogens. So think about how if you smell something, say an animal that's been dead for a while, if you smell that, you immediately want to get away from it. No one had to teach you that. You immediately recognize it as a terrible smell, and everything about you wants to get away from that smell. You want to stop breathing. You make certain facial expressions. The facial expression of disgust closes off the airway. There are all kinds of things going on here, and it's all automatic. You want to get away from that. And so this refers to this purity foundation. Now, this is expanded into other realms like sexual purity and other things. There are lots of STDs, STIs that can come from sexual promiscuity, and this was really a problem before the modern age of medicine. You think about it now and you think, well, you may think it's not as big of a deal, but before the modern age of medicine, this was really a problem. This killed lots and lots of people. And then as it goes into that realm, it starts to go into more of the metaphysical realm, and it expands further and further from there. So there are these 5 foundations. To go over them once again, we have care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, and sanctity, degradation. Think of those as the 5 moral foundations. And the point being that different people coming from different backgrounds have a different level of emphasis on each of those foundations. Now, it typically breaks down along these lines. Typically, if we want to, on average, break people into 2 groups, you have people who care very much about care, harm, and fairness, cheating. They care very much about those 2 individuating foundations, and they don't have as much of an emphasis on the remaining 3. So that's one group. And then you typically have another group of people that have roughly an equal amount of emphasis in terms of their adherence to all 5 of the foundations. So if we want to put it into math terms, just to make it really clear, it's not as simple as this, but just to make it really clear, think about having one group of people that's 50-50 on the care, harm, fairness, cheating, and then think about having another group that's roughly 20, 20, 20, 20, 20 on all 5 of the foundations, okay? So right there alone, you can extrapolate from that information that you have people that are coming from different sets of core beliefs, different sets of core moral foundations that's going to influence what they, adhere to in terms of their religion, their politics, things like this. And this is going to influence their type 1 processing, which is going to influence the way that their type 2 processing tries to, after the fact, make rationalizations for everything. And you're going to notice this from now on, if you didn't already know about these things, all the time. It takes place all the time in all kinds of conversations. You're going to notice it while you're online, reading different articles and different posts from people that you know. It really is something that's fundamental to human nature and fundamental to our interactions with each other. So that's all the sorts of stuff that you're gonna learn from this book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I really wanted to share this with you. It's a couple of theoretical frameworks that I really enjoy and that has really influenced my thinking and my understanding of myself and other people. And I truly recommend the book. So if you like this sort of topic where we cover different, psychological theories and talk about human behavior, human interactions, things like that, then be sure to like this video. And I hope you have a great holiday season with your family and friends. I hope this helps you understand some of the differences in opinion that you may encounter along the way. And I'll see you in the next video.